go. It's probably just going to be the most amazing introduction of myself that I've ever done. But my background, so my name's Kenneth Kinney. I actually work for an agency that is, make sure this clicker's working. Boom. All right. So I work for an agency that is based out of New York. I have worked as, on the agency side, I've worked as a publisher. I have worked most recently for a brand, and I've also worked for a big data company. So I hope that I can bring a pretty interesting perspective to what I do. I also host a podcast called A Shark's Perspective. My nickname since I was a kid is Shark. That is because my passion, I was going to ask you guys, I saw something in the presentation that I did not know to ask, but I love to swim and dive with sharks, and which is what I do when I go to Florida. So most of you guys that are here from Houston, good or bad, how good or bad is the aquarium? Horrible? Is it worth it? Okay. Yeah, if I can't get an up or down, if it's, I'll go with that. So, but I love going to aquariums and spending some time there. But on my podcast, pretty much the majority of my own personal role is spending time talking about marketing and marketing strategy. And that's heaviest, obviously, in digital, but we'll talk a little bit about TV as well. And so towards the end, we're also going to talk about influencer marketing. And we're going to Skype in a friend of mine who I've presented on influencer marketing. I'd like you to sort of, in the meantime, think about some of the questions that you might like to ask a real-life influencer. You know them. You know people like this. But I've heard some questions. Others, Jeff Turnbow and I were talking as well. He had some questions from people. But I'm going to bring on a real-life influencer out of the wild, because the way she talks about it, my friend Kylie talks about it, and barring no technical difficulties, we hope this will be a good add-on presentation towards the end. So we know what the digital strategy masterclass is about. Now, noise. This is something I thought about, and I added this slide after speaking at DigiMarCon in New York. To me, and I do this every time because I usually stay when I'm up there, I usually stay near Times Square. And so one of the things that Times Square so lovingly has done is put up a very good representation of what we're all dealing with in marketing today, which is an abundance of noise. Now, if it's not when you're walking through the street, it is all the noise that's cluttered all over the internet as well, which is where we're primarily focused on. But this is a prime example when you think about the amount of noise that we hear a day. A lot of studies say that you're hearing 5,000 branded advertisements per day. I mean, you walk down 2 blocks and you see 5,000 advertisements, but when you think of all of the touches that go through that are just hitting you today, one of our biggest problems is how to stand out. And I, too, will add, you know, I worked for a large brand. When I said I worked for an advertiser for a few years just recently, that was for TruGreen. TruGreen's a perfect example. They owned about 1/3 of the market nationally. Their biggest competitor, though, was not another company the size like TruGreen, because they bought their biggest competitor, which was Scott's Lawn Care. It was the mom and pops all over the country in lawn care and primarily fertilization that offered a similar type product that collectively was more than 50%. So when you add all that up, that's not too much of a differentiator for what a lot of brands are going through today. So the challenges for most of us, especially for me, because my roles have primarily been in growth and driving leads. It is, and I just jumped a slide. No, I did not. So the challenges for most marketers today focus around what to do with all this data that we're seeing. This came from eMarketer and Winterberry Group, which is a consulting group that focuses heavily on data and a lot of the challenges. They work with a lot of the firms. I used to work for Acxiom, and they had worked with Acxiom, Experian, Epsilon. They do a lot of consulting work for them. So a lot of the focus, I don't think you're going to say, is probably too far off from what you deal with on a daily challenge if you're focused in digital marketing. And this has been pretty repetitive for the last several years. You can find this on eMarketer. But what you're likely focused on, which is what I've been focused on primarily, is leads and sales, helping a business grow. Everything else you want to do to drive noise is mainly focused to always be closing, or at least always be making sales to help grow your business. So I'm going to talk about a lot of different topics today. I have these slides on here with just the title, just so you'll know, because I have technically ADD and OCD, which is a deadly combination, but I have to have this to focus so I can talk about each one of them. First one we're going to talk about, though, is content. So content is king, or is it still? I think that is one of the problems. We heard about it earlier today, that there's a content shock problem. But how do you make your content, rise to the top to where it's focused on everybody? A lot of conferences right now, content's such a heavy push, and there's just been this massive push for everybody to just create content, create content, create content. People are not consuming every bit of that content. Seth Godin said famously, though, if you don't know who he is, you should read. He's written like 18 books. He just wrote one called This is Marketing. He's a fantastic thought leader. But he wrote, content marketing is the only marketing left. And this is a focus that I spend a lot of time talking about as well, because I do produce a lot of content as well for brands that I work with, as well as with a podcast. Content marketing strategy, only 39% of most companies have a content marketing strategy. I'm just curious whether you're with an agency, a brand, an advertiser, would you raise your hand if you have a content marketing strategy specifically nailed out? And you're with Amazon, right? You are a content strategy. So that is the gold standard of content strategy to me. Does anybody else have it? You do? So you're one of the 65% of the top performers in general. These are the companies that map this out. And this comes from reputable groups. This comes from Content Marketing Institute and Marketing Pros, two of the content marketing kings. So we're going to cover a lot of stuff like blogs. So part of the problem that a lot of people want to do right now with when trying to write blogs, and everybody's putting out stuff on their website, it sounds great, but there are over 6 billion websites. 500 million of those are recognized as blogs. That accounts for 2 million blog posts a day. That's an insane number. So how in the world is yours ever going to stay at the top to where you rank, to where your customers and consumers are reading it? So part of the things I like to pick apart, and I've gotten this from a lot of people that I'll reference later, so you'll see, is that the key pieces you got to focus on are consistency, quality over quantity, right to one person, help them solve problems, which is a big thing for me right now. Be authentic, which is a word I hate to overuse. To me, authentic is a word that every time we use it, a millennial at an agency in New York dies. I think that's quite true. And then really consider the author when you're writing the blog. But here's some ideas that I like to talk about. I've seen this, other people do a spin on this as well. But we talked about keyword rankers earlier. You can go to Ahrefs, you can go to SEMrush, SEMrush, you can go to a lot of these different ones, and go find the keywords for the blogs you're writing. Type in your competitors. Celeste talked about this earlier, and look and see what they're ranking. I'm not a big fan of mimicking, but I am a big fan of improving on what somebody else writes. Look for keywords that have low search but high cost per click. Go to Google and search for the word. Find the ones that you're trying to rank for. Don't just look on the first page. Look at the ones that resonate on the second page as well, because you want to look to see what's falling to page 2 where most of the content dies. So don't want to look just at what wins. Look at what's losing as well. And when she talked about this earlier, I could not have agreed with her more. She talks about looking at your competitors, but really take what they're doing and poke a hole in it. Your differentiator, you should take where you can and differentiate that out in a blog piece and write what's basically solving problems for your customers. This is where the market is shifting. I can give you 1,000 studies from 1,000 thought leaders right now in the space who are talking about this. Well, help them solve a problem. You don't need to write a 15,000 word content piece. What you need to do is write a piece that helps them, because if you look at the way the journey has changed for people, this is what it's happening. And then use your employees. Employees in particular, there's not enough employee engagement, which we'll talk about later. But employees, publishers, influencers, sites that share your posts, make sure that they elevate that content piece. Now, you're not going to do that with every blog piece you have, but if you're doing one killer piece a month, these are the ones that you want to reach out to them about. Get your employees, I added a second time just to make certain it was true, amplify that content, and then stop writing articles that suck, because that's, honestly, I say suck instead of another 4-letter S word. Most conferences I tend to drop it, because if you go look at content pieces, they're generally written by people at agencies, and I work for one, so I can say that, but they're written for people at an agency that aren't connected enough to the customer. Now, if you get a good agency, especially with people that are tied more closely to the customer, then you'll understand that differentiator. And there are a lot of great agencies. So content clusters. I don't know if you're familiar with content clusters, but this is where I talk about your main piece. And there are two schools of thought on content clusters. Both are you pick an overarching theme to start, and then you look at the keywords and define your clusters. So if you think of what's your most important piece, that is your cluster. Then you build and create a clustered content around that overarching theme. Another option would be is if you find out which piece of your content's ranking higher. So if you've got 5 similar content pieces, then you find out which one of those 5 is the number one, and you build pieces around that. But basically, if you think of a blog piece about a house, relatively speaking, and then other pieces would be, well, the house needs bricks, the house needs windows. Very poor analogy, I know, but basically that's how you're going to build a better cluster piece. And this is really because we're getting so much content right now. How do you elevate all of them? You can't. There's just not enough room. Your customers are not going to read 20 pieces. You can repurpose it, but find the ones that are where people, it's helping them solve problems, it's helping them get more engaged with your content, they're taking more actions on it. Use those and then optimize those. That's basically the gist of it. Email marketing. So here's some just numbers. I mean, I've seen a lot of different ones. I saw another number that was similar just recently, but people are basically getting about 140-ish emails a day. And to me, this is just, it's way too much. And I don't know how many of you just sign up for email newsletters that suck, but I don't. And so it's one of the reasons that I've been able to constantly just not have to delete everything, is I just sign up for the ones that I don't. But just here's some stats to think about. And one of the things I do, like as a test too, I would encourage everybody, is just go create, because this is what we do a lot of times in retargeting. We've all done it to some bit, put on a pixel. That pixel gets fired once they've come to look at your site. Then they go somehow automatically, and I used to work for Axiom, so the data's out there on all the different email addresses you have, whether it's Axiom or any other verification type data system. But then you start on that email address that you've just created, somehow you are ironically and magically just get up on their email newsletter list. That happens all the time, and it drives me insane. It happens a lot with influencers in the marketing space that I know, that I talk to them and then somehow magically end up on their email newsletter list, and I didn't add them, and it was all triggered through their system. So, it's one of the things that I really freak out on, because email is one of the most intimate and awesome pieces of communication you can have. Email marketing is not dead by any stretch of the imagination. It is one of the highest converters as well. But unfortunately, people have just gotten in this big habit of spamming, because it's another channel you can spam into. So when you start thinking about this, I'd really like you to take some of those stats in mind. Another thing that drives me insane is, and I've done this myself, but why do you design emails using a laptop or desktop when you're reading them with this? This still, I'm not certain why all newsletters are not optimized for mobile more. This is so prevalent in China, where almost everything's optimized for mobile, because that's where people are reading emails. I mean, I'm presenting a PowerPoint off a laptop, but unless I'm, editing a podcast or doing something in Photoshop, there's very likely that I'm going to read 99% of my other emails on a laptop, and that's with customers. I mean, I saw this working with a lot of Fortune 200 brands. The data that would come back on their analytics is how much people would read emails on their mobile. So when you look at your wireframes that you get from an agency, make sure that they're presenting them to you in mobile format as well. So these are basic emails. I'm especially with data privacy and the coming things that are going to happen with GDPR, which I know we have another presentation tomorrow on, so I'm not going to dive too deep on it, but one, don't spam. Look at yourself as a publisher, and most importantly, I've been telling people this for 10 years, with first-party data, build that customer list. That is such a key differentiator for brands that have done that well. So podcasts. Here's another form of content. Edison Research, who a lot of people you may know, said there are over 660,000 podcast shows. As of February of last year, there were 28 million episodes. 45% of those had made over 75,000, which is amazing, and brands are not investing enough in podcasts. They're not really supporting podcasts. A lot of brands want to do this on their own, but what really, at least in my opinion, is they should get behind a verified third party, as in, I'm not endorsing me, but someone like me who has a podcast. It's a third-party validator that can talk about the service. Now, if you're just doing a how-to type service, that's a good form of podcast, but it's not another place to go spam, which is what I'm afraid a lot of brands will do, is just go create content with a bunch of, here's our offer at $19.95 in the middle of it somewhere. But there's been a lot of changes too, and I haven't even read through all of them with Tim Cook's announcement on how they're repositioning iTunes and podcasts as well, because they even recognize podcasts are huge. That's why they get picked up on Spotify. So it's a shameless plug for one of the best podcasts out there. It's called The Shark's Perspective. And we'll talk a little bit about that later. I don't know who put this slide in, but it just fell in by accident. Oh boy, look, those are amazing graphics, weren't they? So video. So I have a bad habit, and this is because I've worked a lot in TV. I'm actually at a TV conference next week, and so I'm going to accidentally drop TV and video together. And so a lot of stats really frustrate me when people look at TV. We hear about cord cutters all day long, and some of the newest stats that I just saw this yesterday, a new stat with the consumption, I think it was eMarketer again. It was either eMarketer or Forrester, put out some information about how video, or about how much media we consume, which was about, I think it was about 12 and a half hours a day. I didn't even have time to add it in the slide. But 12 and a half hours a day of media consumption that we use. And in those channels, digital was skyrocketing. TV was going down. This is the same thing we hear all the time. What they differentiate in there, though, is digital video is really accelerating. TV was shrinking. Well, digital video, if I'm watching on a connected TV and having delivered about a third of the addressable and advanced TV campaigns across the country 2 years ago, personally working 80 hours a week doing this, video and TV are still married closely. YouTube is a different animal, and YouTube's still trying to get more into the TV space, but forgive me if I actually overlap too much of that going forward. But another problem that you think about with just YouTube and how I'm not going to tell you to put video in your content. You already know to do that. It works. But here's some stats to think about. First YouTube video was April 2005. I'm going to talk about this a little bit later with TV. The first TV advertisement was done in it's July 1st, like 1941. So much longer time ago. But now you're already getting 400 hours of video uploaded every minute. The number of people that use YouTube, well over 1 billion, 5 billion views or watch on YouTube every single day. The Generation Z is really consuming YouTube at a phenomenal pace. This is way beyond Netflix and Hulu and things like that. I mean, YouTube's really growing in that area. Social media. So again, here's some stats. This is a dumb hashtag that I've created that nobody will ever use, but I had a TV show and radio show a few years locally, and I would get just bombarded. I was talking to an influencer friend of mine earlier today who I had to divorce myself from all social media because you had to be on all the time. and it even when somebody wasn't tweeting you, but it just shows you the volume outside of what we think about in the big scale of Facebook and Twitter and Instagram. I had to be present on a bunch more. I mean, Snapchat, I don't even know how Snapchat got 186 million daily users, because half the people think it's about to go under, and it's still doing well. I mean, it's, Snapchat and Twitter doesn't make enough money and aren't profitable, but it's still got a massive audience. So when you think about all the channels, part of my advice is not to be on every channel. You've got to be on the channels where your customers are. But this doesn't mean that you need to have 50 different strategies. And trust me when I tell you this, in my opinion at least, and what I've heard from a lot of others as well, Twitter, for example, you don't have a Twitter strategy. You have a social media strategy. You should have a larger, all-encompassing strategy. But Twitter or Facebook is not a strategy. So please don't think of it that way. It just happens to be where some of your customers are. And honestly, is there anybody in here that only has one social media account? I mean, you probably, as professionals in here, you have at least a LinkedIn, and you probably have Facebook or Twitter and Instagram or whatever, and so more of those. So there's overlap in all of these. One of the biggest problems is, this is the stat that freaks people out, and I was just talking to a friend of mine. I was trying to post a podcast this morning, and I had technical difficulty that there's a few choice words came out of the hotel room this morning that you don't want to know, but I had a really good conversation with somebody who was talking about Instagram, and then we also talked about LinkedIn as well. But to me, this represents sort of LinkedIn, but it's an aggregate. So everybody's suffering with content not being engaged and shared and liked. Generally speaking, this is what people are running into, which is why a lot of people run to influencers, because people would rather hear from them than from brands. I think, again, it screams to bad branded messaging and bad content shock, but this is a verifiable stat, as all things on the you'd like to think are on the internet, but this comes from several different competent services, that only 0.5% of content's being engaged and shared. So one of the things that a lot of people are worried about, obviously, was Mark Zuckerberg's announcement just recently, within the last 2 weeks, about the pixel being removed, if you will, with Facebook. So are you guys familiar with that? So I've used Facebook a lot, especially for retargeting as well. But again, this, at least in my opinion, is that the pixel's not being removed. They've added a button that allows you to go up and remove, to set your settings more private. Unfortunately, they will do it, and I've actually listened to some thought leaders in the space just recently talk about this, that it's probably going to turn into like everything else you get that's in the small print. And then as you've deleted that history, it comes back. There are updates to the site, and so things like that happen. So, I'm not too scared about the fate of Facebook by any stretch. You can't have over 2.5 billion users on the planet and really be worried about Elizabeth Warren, shutting the whole thing down and breaking it up. That's not a political stance. I just mean it is a massive channel. They are going to make some privacy changes. I went through some of those when I worked with them in Axiom, but I think what you need to think about, and I added something on the pixel, is, let me go back one more. What it does teach us is that we shouldn't put all of our eggs in one basket, which is what most people have done. And Facebook, myself, I've even focused a lot of people because of the capabilities that they've had with lead ads. And they performed well for me in the past. But it really comes down to having a broader social media strategy. One of the things too, and I'm sure most of you guys know this, but just in case, you can go see that, it's apologies for the screen quality, but that button, you can go look at info and ads and look at every one of your competitors' ads. That's one of the things from privacy that was fantastic that Facebook did implement, is they made every advertisement that you post out there public. So it's served a lot for anybody that hasn't. Just look on any business page's feed and see where the ads are. So when we talk about influencer marketing and whether or not it works, This happened, and a bunch of influencers got together and elevated a stupid picture of an egg to beat Kylie Jenner's record, which I still don't understand technically how they did it, but it did show that a community of influencers, even large influencers, could really have a massive SWAT type appeal to drive traffic. But really what I like to talk about are who are influencers. And I've got some examples with Nextdoor. Is your neighbor next door an influencer? This is a friend of mine who is the social girl traveler. You've got Ryan from Ryan's Toy Review, and then you've got Kylie Jenner. So Kylie Jenner's a billionaire. Are most of us going to use her in any campaigns? No. Are her capabilities as an influencer, though, so much more than Ryan, who he's 7 or 8. My son is in that age range, and my son sees this kid and wants to buy everything he's doing because he's resonated with that audience. The person next to her, Jen Marilla, who's a friend of mine, she is an influencer with I think her total population is about 50, but her engagement's through the roof. And she does a big, heavy, eco-friendly type blog and travel blog. She helps a lot of communities with purification of water, things like that. And her influence is fantastic with what she does with brands. But Nextdoor, which is the one where I really saw, having worked with them in campaigns, is the one where your neighbor had hyper-targeted 1,000 times more influence over what you buy locally. Now, their audience is small compared to most of the other channels, but the amount of influence, and this is the reason I bring this up, is you should be thinking about, and we'll talk about this later, influence instead of influencer. Here's the way to look at influencers if you're not familiar with it already. Your megas are your Kylie Jenners with her following, but nano and micro are really what's moving the needle right now for a lot of brands that I've worked with. This is something that I got from media, I like the graphic from them, but I've worked with influencers a lot in my own career, and I tend to find a much better return. What the challenge for a lot of brands is they think of influencers as large enough to where they can really get to them. Has to be somebody that's well known, but doing the research, you can find a micro and nano, for the most part, is really moving the needle for your brand if you can collectively take the time, and one, they're more affordable, collectively take the time to pull all of them together. So what I've found, and what most people obviously talk about, is that people trust influencers a lot more than they do brand. But what I'd like people to think about in general is to think less influencer and more influence, which is really what moves the needle. Because if you've got a person with a massive following and they are not driving the engagement towards your brand, it really doesn't matter how many followers they have. And so many people, it's one of these silly vanity metrics, they have gotten locked up in thinking followers is going to equate to sales, which is the same argument I ran through when I did addressable TV, when you talk about people who are targeted versus reach. So that is a massive problem. One of the biggest things that I focused on when I worked with a lot of brands, especially like True Green, was ORM, and that's reputation management. So pardon the Taylor Swift slide, but she did have an album for this. But one of the things that I found that I preach about, and one of my friends is a CEO at Consumer Affairs, and he did presentations that I was able to see at another conference a few times, talking about how it can impact sales. I can tell you firsthand, and I'm sure everybody in here who works for a brand has had somebody write something nasty about their brand, probably times 10, depending on the channel. But when you look at the types of tools in the debate, what I found constantly, and I'm surprised about, is that not enough marketers are investing in tools like Sprinkler and Hootsuite and Sprout or Spreadfast, one of those types of social listening tools, but also looking at companies like a Reputation.com, which doesn't have some of the other services that some of the other has, but it has the capability to do a few more things enterprise-wide, where you can tailor in, and we pull this together back at my last company, where we pulled in Reputation.com to make it an enterprise offering so that you could do the social listening and look at it from a brand standpoint. But it is so key to pull that into your CRM data so that you can look to see how it impacts sales. One of the biggest things that I don't think, and it's not black hat by any stretch, but one of the key pieces, and forgive me for this slide, and I think I just got this in my brain and needed to put some Bing Crosby and the Andrews sisters, but one of the key things you can do with blog content as well, though, and these are just simple things to fix, is take a blog post that's written independently. If you're using sometimes even an influencer, have them look at taking a title tag, and if you're, I'm trying to think of an example of how to say it. If you work for Acme Company and you have a service offering that is one that people rail about, Acme's air conditioner system sucks. Make Acme air conditioning system sucks your tag. That starts pulling in Google traffic, and they'll recognize it with the right title tag. And if it's written on an independent third-party, blog post, it's a way to pull away some of the bad traffic. What else you can do that I find so often for reputation, though, and it's something that I found working with a lot of brands. Amazon's a wonderful brand. They have a lot of problems, though. There's not a brand out there doesn't have a lot of problems. But one of the key things that differentiates a lot of them is the phenomenal service that Amazon has. Ritz-Carlton, the former CEO of Ritz-Carlton, wrote this amazing book about being a leader. Ritz-Carlton was a great hotel. They had a lot of problems. Every brand has a lot of problems. So one of the problems that, especially in digital marketing, that I don't think people do enough today is they don't pick that one part of your service to differentiate yourself and then accentuate that as much as possible. Because you can take a niche of your brand and amplify the cough out of it. You can amplify the cough out of it, and it gets more engagement as well. And I've seen this with a lot of brands that I've worked with who focus on not the entire brand, but sometimes it's the amazing 2-day shipping service, or it's whatever. I mean, Amazon's got so many wonderful things. I'm an avid user, but there are a lot of brands that may have one niche and then everything else they get railed on. If you accent as much as you can out of that one niche and amplify that digitally across all the different channels, it helps pull you up from the gutter in some instances. Not all, but some. So employee engagement, again, this is one of the most underutilized things. I'm shocked that I had a conversation with my own CEO about this. Not enough people within employees are helping amplify their own content. I don't understand why. This is one of the worst Google diversity pictures that you can get, but it's there. If you just Google diverse employee or employee engagement, it's always just this weird mix of folks that do with a hard hat. I mean, but employee engagement to me is one of the most underutilized things. I mean, I worked for, I mentioned True Green. They had up to 15,000 employees. How many companies are getting, a third of their employee base to go like something on Facebook? When's the last time you saw something with 5,000 likes that wasn't, something fun on Instagram? So there is a lot of conversation around who is the hero. And I shifted this just from my own conversation. So many people debate when you talk about different forms of marketing, who is the hero when you amplify your content and try to help grow your business digitally. That comes down to, and I added this just strictly because I am an Avengers nerd. That was that movie made me cry like a baby, I'm not gonna lie. My wife looked over at me and thought I was just a complete fool, but when Robert, well, I won't say who it was if you haven't seen it. I don't want to be the NFL player that did that, but there are a lot of people that debate who is the hero, and I found a really good engagement on Content Marketing Institute talking about that, and there are a lot of different thought leaders in the space that think, your customer is the hero, that's who you should put your focus on. At least try to think, especially from a service standpoint, and it's the people that I resonate with tend to think of, you try to be the hero from a service level. I think that's one of the things that Amazon does well. They fix every problem. Hotel brands that are good exist this way. They try to fix every problem. They try to be the hero for their customer to help them solve the problems they have, and not enough businesses are doing that right now. That can be a focus of your digital marketing efforts, though, as well, especially as you look at your content pieces. So paid media, which is a big part of where I exist. So one of the things I will tell you is don't optimize traffic that converts. I think that pretty much makes sense to everybody, but unfortunately there are too many people that still track clicks and not leads. And really, for somebody that works in the paid, we do paid search, and I'm not trying to sell you on anything. Happy to give you a business card later, but I don't have a book or an agency mission to sell. You'll hear me talk more about sharks than you will AI Media Group, but I said that out loud in case my CEOs just listen. But contextually, one of the things to look at specifically with paid media, whether it's search, display, and we all know this, but there are a lot of studies out there that show when contextually your ads should be shown, and here are just a few reasons why. Unfortunately, I don't know why enough people aren't building this out in their decision tree. They're just spamming people still from a linear perspective with ads. But the reason why a lot of how context will work, especially with priming and the overall halo effect, is if they have seen that ad that is not as just simple as taking a pixel and retargeting the shit out of them. So you've got to look at context specifically when you look at your paid media. So with attribution, which is what my company is focused on, we have a proprietary attribution technology. This is really a focus for us. I don't know if you've heard this quote before, but half the money I spend on advertising is wasted. The trouble is I just don't know which half. So John Wanamaker was a famous pioneer in marketing in the 1800s, late 1800s, and that to me sounds like an out-of-work CMO today. So if you're not able to spend time on attribution, which is key, it can really affect a waste of spend. I've gone through it many times on the brand side and seen people waste spend. I'm shocked at massively well-known brands that are Fortune 200 that still waste money today, as large as they are. Some of that was per what, and I'll talk about later, what he also mentioned about with the silos, which is a nasty word. Another problem with that, though, is Google. And this is an opinion that I share with Rand Fishkin. I laughed when I saw him speak a couple of weeks ago. So pardon this bad artwork that I did too. But attribution's next top model should not be last click. It is a dirty word, and last click always makes Google look great. Unfortunately, that's not how people are searching only. It is a fantastic way to search, and I would never tell you to not put plenty of money into Google. But your analytics don't show how a customer contextually is looking across all the different channels that they engage with. You should let data remove the bias. If you have a system in place that allows you to look at Facebook, it allows you to look at your organic, and allows you to look at Google. It allows you to look at call intelligence information when your customers are on the phone with your team. All of these different channels together should drive your optimized spend. I would imagine that most people are not. They have a set budget in here for how much goes into paid media, and then it becomes into different channels. That's what typically is happening with most brands today, is they still have a budget for Facebook, they still have a budget for Google. Some of that has an overlap. But do you really care if your leads are converting, what channels they come from, if they convert well, and if they are at least under what you want your cost to be? Unfortunately, it's still a mindset that most marketers haven't adopted yet. So this is a very important part of the journey to me. Touches to convert by industry. I've got, Google's zero moment of truth, which was great, has some different stats. These are some stats that we saw through different clients that we work with. But you have to look at touches to convert by industry because the seasonality, I'll talk about, it's different. If you're in education, that's a 6-month window minimum for all the content people consume to when they click an ad to when they convert. I mean, it's not just when they saw an ad to when they saw it. You got to tag the entire journey. They may just be looking at your content. If you're not looking at the industry, your industry as a whole as well, and guarding it against that or judging it against that, then you should. Days to convert by industry. Again, these are just representative examples. I'm going to skip through them, but you can look at them later if you want. Here's an actual example with our software, and this is one where they had most of the things tagged. I always tell people that UTM should be your favorite 3 letters. But this is an actual customer journey. So the customer came in the way we reconcile stuff. They came in through Google. They saw a CNN ad on a connected TV device on CNN. They saw something else on Bing, Facebook, Bing, LinkedIn. The trade desk served a media ad through a data partner. They converted back on Google, and then they saw another ad on Bing. This is one example, but this is how we can track TV. Now, I'm not trying to sell you on this, but I just want you to think about the fact most people would think that they converted only on Google. Now, it may have started it, but there were a lot of pieces in between. This doesn't even include all the content pieces. We have some clients who want us to tag everything. We're a fan of tagging everything. If that's tagged, you can see whether or not your content pieces. Unfortunately, most people don't even have this view of the journey because you don't have systems, even a lot of the better systems don't touch all of your different media with all of your different content. But that's really relying on your internal IT team for the most part, tagging as much of it, but also tagging your content as well, tagging your email newsletters. I've got other examples that show where they looked at an email newsletter, then saw an ad on CNN, then looked on Google and came in. You have to look at that full journey now because this is a representative example of the amount of noise that they're seeing out there just with your own brand. One of the things I would like you to consider buying, and I just picked it up recently and I just read the article. I had a really robust discussion with somebody recently, is look towards China. China, this is in the current May-June issue of Harvard Business Review. China does an amazing job of optimizing as a whole. It's one of the few things that they've, maybe they, again, took what we did and they've copied it and made it a lot better. They have taken our stories and really begun to build stories and advertising all as one seamless. They think that way as marketers. They don't think of channel specific. Now, there are plenty of marketers that do, but aggregately they've been taught, and you find the things that they preach are looking at that full journey from content to advertising. And then also they have a very heavy mobile first strategy. So I would encourage you to read that. It's a very interesting article about how they are mapping the entire journey with everything they do so that they get that view of the customer. Measurement. So again, I'll bring up Tom Fishburne. He is a brilliant, but I think unfortunately way too many of us are judging, and I see this constantly, is we're judging too many of the vanity metrics, the likes and shares. Now, if you absolutely know that that is what you want to record and that is your only function is record likes on a social post and that's all you're going for, fantastic. Odds are it's not for the business. So please, when I talk about influencers, numbers, likes and shares, ultimately the people running your business are going to be focused on how that falls into the entire journey to make a sale. MarTech, so another friend of mine, Scott Brinker, just released, this is the 2019 version of the MarTech Lumiscape. Have you guys seen this before? This is generally considered the most overused PowerPoint slide in the world, and it's one of my favorite, but this is something he started years ago. He is the VP of Enterprise and Platform at HubSpot, and I forget his title, but he is focused on all the brands that even on one entire slide you can't see. Here's the social media pieces, here's all the different ad tech and MarTech pieces, but it is over 7,000 types of technology that you have an option as a marketer today. I brought up, just when talking about Hootsuite and Sprinkler and some of those Spreadfast, there are 50 of them, and they all fall into one of these verticals. But this is a challenge today for modern CMOs, is which piece do I buy? Another friend of mine, the CEO and founder of Cabinet M, put together, this is for content marketing tools, but it's really to map the full journey. But just some ones that, WordPress is obviously well known and Google Docs are, but in case you don't use some of those, feel free to look and consider some of those. Tech stacks, again, this is a big concern of mine. It's where I started my career, was building a lot of tech stacks with companies, especially in higher ed, and then also in Memphis where I started working at FedEx and IP and AutoZone and companies like that. But 75% of the marketers reported using technology to look at insight into content, but 56% weren't actually creating insight from that data. This is a common thread that I'm certain that most of you have run into as we are managing a lot of data, but actually getting insight into what the customer thinks or what's driving them is still a challenge. Bots, added something quick. I am personally not a big fan of bots, as you can tell for the amount of time I spent on that artwork. But bots were not there. I work for a company called AI Media Group. I mean, AI, we're still long ways away from producing the kind of interaction that you can get with a customer that helps me solve a problem. One of the worst customer experiences I find is when a bot has pissed me off because it didn't help me get to where I wanted to go. To me, these should be your doorman that points you in the right direction. Again, it's just my 2 cents, but I would, when you're looking at bots in that engagement, you can get really complex with them. Just make certain that that your digital experience is not screwed up because of it. So TV and video. I talked about TV and video and made one specifically on this because it is very important, especially to digital marketers, and TV especially is one that we're missing. It's still nearly 50% of the spend for a lot of people. Now, we're consuming things differently. This dates back to 1941. Now, this is a picture from the 60s of the way people use TV. My first podcast was on TV with friends that worked in the space, but we've considered TV appointment television only, but it is still from a mass appeal when you're wanting to reach people. But one of the best ways, I would never encourage anybody to spend money on a linear national campaign because the Fortune 100 brands I work with, those smartest brands always did addressable because it was more expensive. They could afford it, but you at least knew exactly who you were targeting and how to reach them with what they needed. One of the game changers, though, that I really believe, and this is something that we're going to talk about with attribution in particular, to think about your strategy, if you will, for 5G and what that's going to do for you. There are so many massive brands today who have the types of content that if you think about, one example somebody gave me was, think about if you went to Google and did a search, and instead of seeing a static link, you hovered over it and you saw a video ad for something. I mean, this is not too far out of the realm from happening. Now, technology's there to show you that ad, but the capabilities for it to be slow on your system right now, on a phone, it would just be too slow. It would eat up too much of the networks. This is a game changer that will change a lot of the way. There would be a massive convergence with how we are shown programming and ads because of 5G. If I don't need to connect a coax cable anymore, then I need to change some of my content strategy because now I have a much more robust conversation with customers than I could have ever done before. And a lot of advertising that people still think about are just a few, how many words can I get in my SERPs? But now I can do that with more video. So as you start thinking about your video strategy, if you will, make sure that it is video content that does not suck. It is unfortunately what's going to force a lot of people into just flooding it with more video. But that's not going to help people solve the problems they need. TV spin, this is a very recent, this one came from the IAB. Digital video and TV still takes up, digital video is accelerating. That's what's growing, especially in 2019, but just slightly from 34 to 36. Broadcast and cable TV has dropped from 32 to 28. So we're seeing drops, but these are not the massive shifts we hear about every day. We do know that digital video is dramatically increasing, but it doesn't mean that everybody's cut the cord tomorrow. What's really, again, what I think will be a game changer will be 5G. We're spending more on digital video. So you should, I'm certain, integrating a lot more of that into your ads, but I have worked for a brand that had 2 people buying, programmatic TV ads, which was crazy. This is another problem that we run into with a lot of brands where they don't know what to do with TV right now. They don't know what to do with video and TV, if you will. This, what I thought was very interesting was how they, when people start looking at their digital video allocation, this was in an IAB just recently, very interesting when you look at all the types of channels that we use across social, but people are still spending more money on Facebook for the most part than they are on YouTube, which I just thought was funny. YouTube's had a lot of issues that we've known about over the last few years, but again, this again shows the shift of where people are starting to serve ads even more. I mentioned that I worked for Axiom, and I remember my first week I was there, just the amount of data that people have out there about themselves. I'm not going to get too far into GDPR, but it is an overwhelming amount of data. And I still remember somebody saying in the hallway, and he meant it completely as a joke, this is nothing against Axiom, he said that people shouldn't be afraid of what the NSA knows about them. They should be afraid about what companies like we do. And that is, Axiom, Experian, Epsilon, these are all well-known big data companies that have an amazing amount of data. There's still a huge amount of dark data that you're putting out that you don't even know you're putting out. So these are the things that, per another study from eMarketer that was recent, I'm not sure who that was, it might have been with Winterberry again, but some of the things that people are thinking about the most aggregately as a whole, again, this was a survey, a fairly large survey, but government regulation with how GDPR, or which just had its first birthday, so happy birthday GDPR. We are just now getting into CCPA starts in 2020. There are another dozen plus states that are looking at regulations. My hope personally is that we go to a federal level like GDPR so that we're not having to navigate as marketers or advertisers how to navigate against 50 different channels. But right now you have a problem in that in 2020 you've got to serve your ads somewhat differently in California. Now, who the hell wants to think about that 50-fold? So hopefully that regulation and make it as loose as possible, since we are in marketing and advertising, that we can at least navigate and figure out. But the amount of data that we're putting out, this is one of the things, I'm going to borrow this from a friend, Chris Penn, who's a well-known influencer. I saw him do this in a presentation, and I just changed it, replicated it. A zettabyte, I don't know if you're familiar with what a zettabyte is, but if you equate a gig to one brick, and his example he uses is basically one Netflix movie. So if you think of a Netflix movie, the data pronounced is 33 zettabytes, which is, here's a gigabyte, here's a zettabyte. We're putting out enough data per day to build almost 4 Great Walls of China if you took a zettabyte and equated it to a brick. Where that data is shifting, so you talk about the problems that digital marketers have with trying to control data, this is the forecast of how much it will grow. I mean, we're at 33 today. Now you're talking about growing that times 5, basically. That's a lot more data to consume, and a lot of that data we already pull in. We just don't know what to do with it or where it goes. The biggest problem that I run into nonstop is with companies not having clean data. I'd love to give you some just amazing horror stories, but I can't due to potential for lawsuits. But the way people and brands handle data today, sadly, it comes up all the time with breaches, with everything else. I can tell you that, stories that friends of mine will often tell about how a company would give another data company a customer list on a thumb drive. I mean, these are people's, not just social, but it's all the data that you have out there that shouldn't be out there. So if you haven't taken the precautions, whether you get a CDP or whatever form of technology, again, the focus should be on cleansing your data first and then guarding it. Audience targeting. So again, persona is another word like the other one that kills a millennial every time I say it. Persona is the other word I hear the most at conferences, I think. And it's very true. Most companies have your traditional 3 personas. They have millennial, male or female, or maybe it's a picture with a couple. They'll show an older male who's making good money, and then I tend to call the other one, they'll show, I see this because I see this on Getty Images a lot with samples. It's a divorced mom with her kids, and those are like your typical 3. They drive me crazy because that's what people have boxed into. Here's how we identify our customers, or we forced them into these 3. Having worked at a company that had data on 295 million Americans, was a little, to see the amount of data where you could go out there, you do need to be, statistically correct per what we were talking about yesterday or earlier with testing, but there's so much further you can dive. I'm a big fan of creating a lot more personas and diving deeper. Typically, I go as deep as 10 or 12 on the number of personas, but that's if you have the data to support. But you also should look at personas like persona clusters. You can segment out people beyond just a persona, and that's part of your targeting. If you have just, say, 3 buckets of 3 and just looked at 9, you can also target at a higher level on one group and then dive down if you've got more data behind another. So dive in as deep as you can to get a more concrete conversation and know your customers that much better. So brand differentiation, this is one of the things that I find amazing. And you were talking about Patagonia out in the hall when I first got here, and this kind of goes towards that. So pay attention to this part. You can go back to sleep. But a friend of mine talks about this a lot in behavioral science, and I'm a big fan of all marketers, especially digital marketing, investing in psychology and what they need to learn. In particular, 2 of my favorite books. Well, these are all 3 are favorite books of mine. A friend of mine put me on to Gerald Zalman, which I think is about a 10, 15-year-old book. But Martin Lindstrom, who is an amazing marketer in general, he used to own BBDO, and he is speaks all over the world. Biology is a fantastic book. But why do people buy things, and this can be replicated digitally as well, but why do people buy this as opposed to this when it has the exact same thing? So Bayer, for example, has created this perception, and you can equate this in digital terms as well, but because they replicate this digitally, they have taken people like me. Now, my wife would be smart and go buy the generic aspirin, but people like me have this sense when I go to the store that somehow there's something added that I need to pay $2 more for. And it happens all the time. The young man was talking about some delightful experiences. This again goes back to where you accentuate something in your brand that really makes it that differentiator. That we used to be in such a heavy price conscious realm. We're not that same way anymore for a lot of people, because they want to know what the differentiator is. They want you to focus in on what makes your brand distinctively different. From a brand standpoint, Bayer's killing it all day long as far as I'm concerned, because they're making dummies like me pay more. But they've created this perception that I see in their marketing and advertising. It makes me believe it's a better product than the same thing that's labeled with nothing else on it. So one of the things I use, and this is my bird box example, I actually, it was too late to take a picture of the hotel room, and plus I messed up everything. But if you stay over at the JW Marriott, which is, in case anybody's here from there, it's a lovely hotel. But it is indicative of this same example. So a friend of mine runs a hotel in Memphis, the Peabody, and he had not seen Bird Box, but she's afraid to take off the blindfold. 45 million people saw this the first week it came out, which is just phenomenal how people consume TV differently today. She doesn't know where she is. She doesn't have a clue. So I do the same. I take the same things a little bit further, in that if you ended up in the hotel upstairs and you had a blindfold on and you took it off, if you didn't see a pen or a notepad that had told you where you were, you wouldn't have a clue where the hell you were. If you tried to call the police and said, "Oh my God, I just woke up, I had a blindfold on, they had me duct taped, I don't know where I am," that is so typical for most brands everywhere. And if you think of where you are replicating stuff digitally with copying what your competitors are doing, this is a problem that you create. And then you start paying the same amount as they do for generic terms on Google, and that keeps going higher for those generic terms. So you've got to look at creating your differentiator. And this can be done especially in the world we live in with complex, longer tail solutions. But Ann Hanley, who was my Show 100, and she's fantastic content marketing. She's the what's she called, the not godmother, the queen of content marketing. If you took off the logo, would people know your brand? And this is a problem that I run into with a lot of people who don't know how to differentiate things out. You've got to figure out what your differentiator is, not from just a a brand marketing standpoint, because I don't spend that much time in my life anymore on creative. What I do worry about, though, is I'm paying a lot more for generic terms, and that is a focus. So you've got to differentiate out what your different level of service. Is it the example I brought up from Ritz? Is the room better? Do they have some, cornhole in the lobby? Whatever the hell it is that you want to differentiate, and then amplify that. The power of brand, though, these are perfect examples. I don't look on the internet for anything. I don't Bing anything. I Google it. I mean, I don't ever ask for a tissue. I ask for a Kleenex. Your CRM, you've probably asked, is your Salesforce? Is your CRM Salesforce? No, it's Salesforce. So nobody gets a coffee anymore. They go to Starbucks. Soda, not so much anymore. Nobody goes. Jacuzzi's a brand. It's not the name hot tubs or the generic terms, but people think of jacuzzi. Who's asked for lip balm lately? I mean, it's you ask for chapstick. That's what you order when you order things. So that differentiator is massively important for how we do a lot of different things. And you've got to think of yourself as that. And I thought I slipped the slides, but you've got to think about that too as well when you just distribute your content. Things today, all brands need to think like a publisher. And so you take all these pieces and start putting out those different forms of content digitally and feed your audience just like you would. I'll give you a tangible example. When you're pulling all these pieces together, start looking at like you're promoting a movie. So the commercials for a movie, they all push back to that central movie. So they make that message and they push those in different forms. That's not the way we do a lot of marketing today. Now that's harder to do seasonality-wise from a longer term standpoint, but you got to think that way. Think like a publisher. Think like you are the New York Times or Time Magazine or Sports Illustrated that just got sold for $110 million. But think like any of those and draw your customers in that way with the types of content and digital noise. Feed them that way. Feed them with your email list that way. With that content. Think smaller, think local is a big thing that I run into a lot. Not only is that important because you're competing against, I gave you the example with True Green competing against the mom and pops all over the world. This is particularly important when this lovely timely map or picture of Houston, and I search for a coffee shop in Houston, and oddly enough, those three came up when you think of coffee in Houston. Those three came up. That is a local strategy that will help them a little bit compete against the Starbucks. So whoever optimized those three did a decent job because most of the time that would fill up with Starbucks. So you've got to hyper-think your near-me strategy locally. That is such important with all the ads that we do. The location-based advertising, especially how it can help you with your reputation that we talked about earlier. It's a reputation play. It's a local listing play. Voice. So one of the most important things, and I don't necessarily equate this to a voice strategy because I get tired of the buzz too much with voice, in that voice is not solving every problem on the planet like Google wants to tell us. What I'd love for them to be able to start doing is how many problems did it solve for customers? How many answers did it do? And that's part of the problem is because, no offense to Amazon, I have a lovely Echo sitting there. But there's not enough content out there currently. Not enough people have looked at voice SEO to really help put things out. This is not a fault of Google Home or an Echo. We haven't put enough content out there to help solve these longer term problems that people have. So when somebody asks your Echo, you're not asking them how to solve a problem, you're asking for basic things right now. But voice is such a critical piece of marketing today. How many of you guys work with, I think I've been pretty good. I have not done a lot of raised hands questions, but how many of you guys work with call intelligence software today? The camera lady does, okay. So voice intelligence software is so critical today if you're receiving a lot of calls from your customers. I've worked with a lot of the different brands, the Invocas, the CallRails, the Dialogue Text, the Marchexes of the world. Invoca's personally my favorite. I guarantee Amazon does. You just didn't want to raise your hand. You've probably got something proprietary built anyway. But when you can if you're getting a lot of calls from your customers, this part of the voice strategy is what I get excited about, is you're taking a lot of calls for a large brand. Those calls can be transcribed in real time. A lot of them, I think Invoca and another one uses part of the IBM Watson technology as well as a back end. But those technologies can transcribe what people are talking about. That can then tell DoubleClick, here's the ad to optimize, because based off this longer tail keyword strategy, this is what they converted on. And I implemented Invoca a couple of times. It's a good brand. I'm not endorsing any of them in particular, but those are different options you can use to also, in another channel, look at here's the types of ads that are converting. It's based off the real conversations they're having with your call center, and the technology's not that crazy to implement. Optimization. So we've had a couple of people, we're going to have a couple of people tomorrow talk about it. I will tell you that working in the paid media space on multiple times in my life, this to me still, I don't understand why people aren't spending more times. I've had so many conversations with brands that think this is like a foreign phrase that they don't, it's, I don't know, it's it's a foreign thought. They don't know to spend time to really optimize landing pages. You're getting, on average, 2% of your advertising drives to a landing page or somewhere where people are converting. When you get them there, that's gold. I don't understand why people in general aren't spending more time optimizing that, because if you have a customer there, that is the closest opportunity you're going to have from a digital perspective to make a sale. So optimized thank you pages, which has been, Jeff mentioned this earlier. I will tell you that it is, from a branding standpoint, from a differentiator standpoint, it is an amazing way to leave them with a softer message. I work for a brand. I'm very careful about upselling because I don't want to lose the sale. Are you just taking the Ariana Grande picture? Is that what you're doing? No, just kidding. It's sad that I knew Thank You Next as a song too. And if anybody didn't get the Donuts reference, shame on you. It is an unbelievable way to leave them with content to reinforce them on the back end. Unfortunately, not enough people put out there more than thank you, we'll get in touch with you soon. It's usually BS. There are so many things that I did with video where we were integrated on the back end to reinforce. There were things we did with charity, because when I worked for a brand that drove 1 million leads a year basically into off landing page optimization. We integrated one that we did with St. Jude Hospital. St. Jude Hospital, to me, is the greatest hospital in the world. It's in Memphis, where I am. We did a video with them. We used that video showing how much we cared, our employees cared. It had music. It made a bunch of wonderful kids with cancer smile. And, strategically, it made a lot of sense for us to show people that we had a heart doing something like that. It's a different type of social proofing to really show here's where you exist in the space. Again, with cause, and again, this was the event I pulled together, and I've done this part of the presentation a few times. I'm not doing the video today. New York, I almost got teary-eyed again. But 2 years ago, I'll share, my mom got sick. She had a series of strokes, and then she ended up passing away. During that spring, I started planning out something that we were going to do with St. Jude. That event happened just under a week of when she passed away. The reason I went to it, though, it was because something I wanted to pull together where I wanted to help the kids of St. Jude. I wanted to hire, I just spent a lot of time in New York and seen a lot of character artists. So I wanted to go see these kids. Most of them, he was growing his hair back, but most of them, when you go through and look at the hospital tour, they don't have hair. And I did the event because you had to get it on the books ahead of time. You had to get it approved. And I knew that, and my mom, God rest her soul, knew that for me, what mattered most in the world, what matters more than anything is these kids. And, knock on wood, my son's never had cancer. But what it did for me because you can tell my heart's in it. I mean, I get teared up thinking about the kids and my mom. But we used it in a lot of videos. One of the speakers tomorrow will talk about how we used it, I think. But it showed that we had a heart. We had a lot of employees engaged in it. There were stories from the kids. And this was a wonderful opportunity for you to take something as simple as supporting, helping bring in character artists and help kids with cancer, show that your employees care. That's a wonderful message you can use, where it was our number one ranked deal that we did on social that year. It helped convert. It had a higher conversion rate than others, and it was on a landing page. It was the type of content that just shows your company can care, and it's something that strategically makes sense. I don't want to take the strategy too lightly, though. We didn't do it as a strategy. We did it to help the kids. But that's one of those things that can really help elevate your business from a lead generation standpoint as well. So I'm going to go to teams. So one of the biggest problems that if you're hiring anybody today is finding the right talent. And this is such a big problem for people right now, just because of the podcast alone. I have people that have seen with me on the speaking tour and heard my podcast and see what I do with the breadth of stuff that I talk about in digital marketing. The amount of requests now that I get from recruiters has skyrocketed. It was already doing okay, but it is unbelievable the types of brands now that are reaching out to me. And I'm not the smartest cat in the room by far. I'm very learned, but it even reflected back on me that, and I've talked to a lot of people that are having just a constant churn and burn, especially in the agency world. And unfortunately, what they're getting is they're taking people and then forcing them into tasks. And it is a massive problem everywhere, all over the country. So, and I bring it up only because it's one of those things that you're not typically going to talk about at a lot of conferences, but this is as big a problem for most people. It's as big a problem as SEO or PPC. So one of the problems that I find in most people is that when they do go to learn, they go to Google Trends. And this is where sheep go, and I will tell you, please don't do it. Invest more time in yourself and learn. Marketers today have to get smarter. And the average number of podcasts that people listen to today, that if you do listen, is 7. And I will tell you that I probably listen to 3 times that just because of commute, exercise, things like that. But you have to constantly be learning because of where we are. I would bet you $100 that I'm going to show you some names here. I'd be shocked if anybody, unless you've looked at my slides or heard this before, knew who most of the people were that are moving our space. Because when you think about, if you were a high school football player, you know every one of the pro football players out there, the big names. If you're if you're want to be anything, for the most part, you generally know who the biggest names are to move the space. Marketing, we typically don't. So I applaud you at least for coming to these spaces. But you've got a lot of digital marketing directors who are not investing a lot of time as well into knowing how to have a conversation with somebody on Facebook. Or if you sat down a lot of senior directors in front of a Google Ads console, they would lose, they would freak out a little bit. And it's one of the things that I've tried to make myself constantly learn, constantly read. And now that I do, especially the podcasts, and I've pulled in a lot of the contacts that I've developed over the years, it's helped me really focus on becoming a better marketer. And one of the things you've got to look at that drives me insane, that I think it will help give you a different view, is something that apparently I must have gotten hit by a silo as a child, but I absolutely hate silos. Your customers don't exist in silos. Why do your marketing and advertising efforts do so? And it drives me insane when the gentleman from Juan spoke earlier today. He was exactly right. Most of the major brands are working with 24 agencies. And you've got internal teams that are split off completely from those agencies. They may be doing a lot of work with one agency, and then there's another internal team working with another agency. It still is siloed completely with a lot of the efforts, and a lot of that comes down to you're creating mixed messaging for your customers. You've got to take an omni-channel approach, and especially having worked for a big data company that drove down to the customer level with how we looked at how to tag a person as opposed to a persona. It also showed me that a lot of your higher performance, especially in your paid media, is when you omni-channel your messaging and omni-channel your advertising. Amazon does an amazing job of this. They look at the holistic view of the customer. Going back to the slide that I showed you with TV and with Google and Bing, that's how you've got to look at the customer journey anymore. They're not going through they're going through a lot of different channels, but they don't have the time to peel through the deep layers that you want to believe is your brand. You've got to give them a more succinct message in today's digital noisy world. But they take all these things, that's all the noise of you, and it comes down to this. This is how they view your brand. And if you start looking at that with all the channels and focusing all those efforts, it will help you give a better view to your customer. Problem solving. So again, I mentioned this earlier. What problems are you as a brand, as a marketer, trying to help solve for your customer? This is key today for where people have shifted their focus in search. We know that the problems are actually more complex like this, and I used to solve these things as a nerd, so why I added these pictures. But unfortunately, for me, what I find so often today is that we look at our customers like this. Green is the view we have of them, and red and yellow are a chance to upsell once we've tagged them with a pixel. And unfortunately, it has not gone back to how we help solve the problems for them, both as a marketer and as a digital marketer. You've got to rely on a lot of direct marketing tactics and to do this as well. One of the ways that I was talking about pulling some channels, I call this pixel to postcard. A lot of people, a gentleman said direct mail was dying earlier. It couldn't be more wrong. Direct mail, I don't even get that much direct mail. Now that I do, I pay attention to it. You can place a pixel, turn over a postcard in 24 hours, and mail it out the door. That's better context on marrying two forms of advertising than just hitting them with a bunch of messaging that doesn't make sense. There are a lot of companies out there that do it. The integration's not hard to do. You can validate it with a lot of data out there. I'm going to skip this because this is the most important thing you can do. Like, know, and trust is what we're all challenged with in marketing. But I would really tell you to focus a lot of what you're doing when you're creating those solutions, if you will, for your customers. Focus on trust. Like, know, and trust is important. Trust should be in all caps. It's the closest thing you can get with your brand. Take this customer, and this is probably not going to work. I'm going to skip it. I would like you to think about replacing your Google strategy with a customer strategy. This is one of the things that, from a digital experience, I wish more people did, because they've gotten so much of what they've accomplished with Google and replicated it out. And Google's a wonderful channel. It's not the only strategy you should have. Focus more on user experience than title tags, which is, I still don't understand why people don't do that from an SEO perspective, because if you want to exist in today's world as it's changing in marketing advertising, that's the way to do it. Challenge is that you should do everything you can in your marketing and digital marketing efforts to focus on your customer, help them solve problems, and obsess on it. It is a massive topic for me in my book coming. This is a really wonderful candid picture. I would love for you to go to Walmart and spend $5 on one of these lovely frames, and instead of putting a picture of your dog or your family only, take a picture of a customer. And those sounds, stay with me. I can see that the way she's smiling too. Take a picture of a customer and keep that even if it's a fake picture, put that focus on your desk and start thinking of them that way. It will help you drive your advertising a lot better. It'll do your content a lot better, and so on. So, where you can hear me babble more, because this wasn't enough, is to go to asharksperspective.com and find me on LinkedIn. A lot of the names that we've had, these are. Do you guys recognize any of the pictures on here? You do? Good. Which one do you recognize? Thank you. Guy's awesome, and I just talked to him thank you, a little while ago. But Ann Hanley's top left, Rand Fishkin, Martin Lindstrom, Joe Polizzi, Guy Kawasaki, Robert Rose. I've been trying to get Aaron on the show, but he won't do it. Jay Bayer, Russ Henneberry, and Ryan Dice, Tom Fishburne, who's not an actual cartoon, Neil Patel, Scott Brinker, Chris Penn, Michael Brenner, Tamsin Webster, Rohit Bhargava, and Mark Schaefer. These are just some of the names that he's had speaking here. These are people that I've known for years, and some I've just met. Guy Kawasaki I just had on the show was one of the big kunas he was an officer twice at Apple. And these are the kind of people that are moving the needle for us in our space. So these are the kind of people that I often talk to. And you needed another picture of me because this wasn't enough, but please feel free to reach out to me on LinkedIn, or I'll be here all day tomorrow introducing some people. So, oh wait, there's another blatant advertisement. So one other thing that we're gonna do, just as additional, because some people had asked questions about influencers, and I asked you guys to sort of think of some questions, is I'm going to bring on to the show a friend of mine, bring on to this show. We're going to do a Skype interview with her real quick. She is an influencer, and I find that influencer marketing quite often is one of the, we're going to go ahead and cut to Kylie. So we only got 2 for Kylie? Okay. So this will be quick. If you want to stay over, we can, a couple of minutes. If not, you're dead to me. Just kidding. I thought that was for this. Oh, that's just scary. And I know she's there. Kylie, can you hear me? I can hear you, and the volume, you got the volume? Can you jack it up a little bit more? Say something, Kylie. Yeah, more or less. You guys can hear?
Have you plugged in the sound into your laptop?
Yes, I'll try that. There you go. Good man. We got to fix. Hey, your video's not working, by the way.
I know. I'm trying to turn it on. It was being funky earlier too.
So while she's trying to fix her video, Kylie Francis, friend of mine, and we've also spoken.
Okay, there we go.
There we go.
Hey, everybody.
Hey. You did the hey. So Kylie is a influencer in the social media space, and she's somebody I profiled on my show. We've also done presentations together, but influencer marketing is such a hot topic. We just pulled this together real quick today. I'm super excited to have her on here. She's not great with Skype cameras, but she's a very, very smart influencer as well. There are a lot of influencers out there who are good, but not don't appreciate all the things that we go through as a agency or advertiser. So I pulled her together, and another reason I think she's incredibly smart is because she's been making a 6-figure income off this for 5 or 6 years at least, and she's done a lot of it through Pinterest. And I have this, we typically think of our major influencer channels as YouTube and Instagram, which she has a following. She has a massive following on Facebook as well. But anybody that can figure out a way to make predominantly a 6-figure income on Pinterest is pretty damn smart, because, and she also helps coach and teach a lot of entrepreneurs. Any luck on your video?
Yeah, it was on, and then I don't know what happened. So, but I can still hear you. So.
Yeah, but we want to see you.
I know. Okay. I'm sorry. I'm trying to get it to work.
There, I'll do this.
Because I can't see you now either, so I don't know if it's.
You can't see me now either. Well, I won't do that. I was going to show a picture. So, Kylie, talk to me real quick about, there we go,
Okay, there I am.
boom.
I'm back.
All right, so give us some ideas, as marketers, you got a room full of really smart marketers in here that work for brands and agencies and all sorts of things, but what are some of your top things that you've seen that have helped you engage with brands more closely, and what are some of the things that just drive you crazy as an influencer? Because I know a lot of us know it's a cool topic, but they don't know how to engage with influencers like you. They don't know what are the best ways to go about it. It's such a dynamic area to try.
Right. So I think one of the things that a lot of brands get wrong when it comes to not just finding influencers, but creating the contracts, is they don't let the influencers be creative enough and give them the reins with their product.
Yeah.
So when it comes to finding the right influencer, you want to look for people that actually have interest in the product or service that you're providing. Because a lot of times, especially in the age of like everyone looking at vanity metrics and numbers, what a lot of people do is they'll go and they'll see the number of followers, which more than likely in 2019 is fake. And they're like, okay, we're going to get the most return on investment because that person has a higher follower count than, let's just say, one person A has 100,000 followers and person B has 50,000 followers.
Oddly enough, I just talked about that. Yeah,
right.
You're absolutely right.
Yeah, so what's super important is to look at the engagement. So look and see how many comments and shares are happening with the photos and direct messages as well. And you can get all of that information from the influencer, and statistics are huge because the problem is that, like I said, in the land of people buying followers, buying likes, being fake, you can't really tell anymore from a first glance if somebody is worth investing in. You're going to have to deep dive into the analytics and really see if there is the engagement there, so you know that you're going to get an ROI from that influencer.
So what do you think are some of some of the things that brands have asked you and agencies that have been wrong? Like, what are the things you just, I think one of the things I'll set up this way, talk about the value in particular, because we've talked about this ad nauseum, about getting the influencer involved in a campaign with a creative vision.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so a lot of things that I like when I've worked with brands is and you said the question was, what did I like when I worked with brands? Is that what you said?
Yeah.
Okay, so what I liked was when brands allowed me to hold the creative vision of the product, because that, at the end of the day, builds brand affinity with not only between the customer, but the people that are looking to buy or purchase from you. So what that means essentially is if you kind of like come in on an influencer's platform and you tell them the type of pictures to take, how to pose with the pictures, what to do, when to post, all of these things, you're kind of taking over somebody's platform that they have the most creative vision with. And not only that, they know their followers better than you do. So if you allow the influencer to take your brand, product, or service and just allow them to you can still have control over your brand, because I know a lot of businesses freak out. They're like, well, we don't want to have this wrong vision about our brand. But if you really find the right influencers, what you can do from there is you can allow them to hold creative direction over what you need them to pursue, which is amazing on the business's part, because then you don't have to spend your time, figuring out creatives and how to pose with the picture, when to post, all of those things. The influencer is going to know how to do that. You just need to allow them to do that. So one of my favorite things that I like when I work with businesses is they really allow me to take the creative reins. They allow me to take the pictures. They give me the product, and then I can, do not just, I can put my own twist onto the product or service that I'm promoting to my followers. And then it's a win-win all around, because my followers like it. They're introduced to a new brand or service if I haven't used it yet, but I have trust in it because maybe I used it on the back end. And then when I start using it, then they trust me. So now they automatically trust that brand, product, or service that I am using and bringing light to their eyes that they probably have never seen before.
Agreed. And one of the things, I've worked with a lot of influencers, a lot of campaigns, and she is spot on. when you think about this is the kind of stuff though that makes, having gone through this just not that long ago, your communications team and your legal team in particular will freak out because they cannot control it. But who does the audience listen to? Are they going to listen to your brand babble, whether it's on digital or any other social channel or anywhere else? No, they're going to listen to people like Kylie, which are built off of, authenticity. Again, every time we use the word authenticity, we're killing a millennial at an agency. That's what's happening. But she is so spot on with where this is going. And the reason why this is an important topic, and I want to throw it out for some questions, is because this is the fastest growing increase in spend. Granted, this is not where, influencer marketing has been around for multiple millennia. It's just rapidly advanced in the last few years because Instagram really blew this out of proportion, but it's also trapped us in this dumb mindset that she just perfectly clarified, is it can't get caught up in followers, the number of followers. You got to think influence and not influencer. So I'll repeat these questions if we got to, but because we have a real live influencer out in the wild that we're going to ask, does anybody have any questions that they'd like to ask about anything?
I love question and answers.
She loves question and answers. And we got a microphone as well. Let me ask you this. Are you working with many at your agency? So what are the things that you're seeing that are working well and are not working well?
Was that for me?
No, hold on.
Okay.
I'm afraid to turn around the camera.
So some of the things that are working well with our particular client would be sponsored content opportunities versus exclusive partnerships. That's one thing. But again, letting the influencer have creative control is ultimately the message that we're trying to send to the client, but it is very tricky with their legal team.
Did you hear that? She reiterated a lot of what you just said. How are you going about, and let me get Kylie to answer this first. How are people typically reaching out to you? And this wasn't blatantly brought out for Kylie doesn't need to get, 1,000 pieces more of business. This was just, she was good enough to open the kimono and let us kind of peek into her mindset a little bit. How are people best getting in touch with you Kylie, to how are people best reaching out to you to start the conversation? Because that's another problem that I find extremely, a lot, that they don't know where to go to find an influencer. They've read about it. It's in all the magazines. It's all the rage. But how do we find one without going out on a safari to find one?
Right. So like you said, there's two ways to find influencers. You can go, now that influencer marketing is becoming more popularized, there are websites that are strictly dedicated to hosting all the influencers, and all you have to do as a business is go to the website. One of the best ones that I've always get recommended to is FOHR. It's FOHR.co. And what they do is they host thousands of influencers, and they have all the analytics, so they can it's almost like you log in and you can find any influencer that you need, and they've done all the dirty work. They found if the engagement rate's high, if they have fake followers, all the analytics you need to know about an influencer and how much they charge, they host on that platform. So that's like the easy route if you don't want to waste your time manually looking for influencers. But the only downfall of that is a lot of those influencers their prices are inflated, which is fine. I'm not saying all of them are, because one of the best reasons why a lot of businesses should use influencers is just, as people in general, our psychology, we don't know our own worth. So we don't know how to price ourselves, which is amazing, because they're saying that an average dollar spent on an influencer, you're getting around $8 in return, which is kind of insane. So if you kind of want to do the dirty work and get your feet wet by messaging people on Instagram or Pinterest or YouTube or podcasting, I think Kenneth said this earlier, is that a lot of people hyper focus on Instagram because that's what's super popular right now. But it's really dependent upon the type of industry that you're in. Because if you're in an industry that focuses a lot more around digital marketing or tech, you're going to have a better time looking on podcasts or YouTube channel or people that are specifically talking about your niche, because there's a lot of different ways that you can target influencers just by there's a lot of different ways that you can target can't even talk. Find good influencers on Instagram. And a lot of the times, the more in-depth and the more detailed your niche is, you're going to have to go also more in-depth on the platform. And Instagram can just be very, face-oriented, picture-oriented, which I'm not saying doesn't work, but you can get a lot more value off of value-based search engines like blogs, podcasts, Pinterest, and YouTube. Those are my 4 favorite, and I know Kenneth said this earlier, but I come from a search engine background, which is Pinterest. And a lot of people underrate Pinterest, but in reality, Pinterest is a search engine. So when you pay for a pin, and a lot of people don't understand Pinterest, which I completely understand, but the dummies version of Pinterest is that every time an influencer posts a picture onto Pinterest, it's actually a clickable link that lasts forever on a search engine. Yeah. So you could pay them one time, but if that pin goes viral, your ROI is going to be like exponentially greater than focusing on an influencer on a time-sensitive platform like Instagram or Facebook. Because quite frankly, the fact of the matter is when influencers post on Instagram or Facebook, the post is dead after 30 minutes after they post. So you're still going to see an ROI if you have the money to spend on influencers that have a lot of following. But with the changes of the algorithm, you're probably better off focusing on influencers that are situated onto search engines. And the 4 that I said are blogging, which is like a website, Pinterest, YouTube, and podcasting. I think podcasting would probably be number 1 in my book because it's on the rise. You can get a 15 to 30 second clip, or you can have an influencer pitch your product and they can use a discount code, and you're going to see a really, really, really high ROI with podcasting.
Real quick, best podcast you've ever heard or seen?
Mine?
Yeah. What's your favorite of all time?
A Shark's Perspective.
Thank you. Thank you. See, influencer marketing works. So, any other questions from anybody? Bueller? I have a new shark tie, by the way. So, since the last time you saw me, Kylie, thank you very, very much.
Thank you so much. It was so great to talk to you guys.
Everybody wave to Kylie.
Bye.
Bye-bye. So I really appreciate it because a lot of the influencers you talk to, one is the conversation where we have to pitch something, and the other, where they pitch something and it's more of a transactional relationship. One of the things I've done both in previous life as a paid influencer, but also I've really spent a lot of time sort of getting in the mindset of it because it's one of the areas that's obviously really, really growing. So last but not least, I appreciate everybody going over, but I knew, oh wait, what do you know?